his learning. And she wrote this book called The 19 Letters, which is still very fresh and edible even today. It's basically a series of letters between an older man and a younger man. The younger man questioning his Jewish identity.
I think that Meyer and Shabbat had something to do with modern art.
There's so much culture and so vibrant. Why am I focusing all of my personal intellectual energies in this very narrow scope of human civilization when I could be involved in the whole world? And so this little series of fictional letters go back and forth, in which Hirsch takes on the role of the older, uncle, who writes to his nephew, and explains to him
when he said that
why the Jewish study is of great value. And of course, the storyline
to modern orthodoxy is just
involvement. So Gretz read this book and he said, "Oh my gosh, it is talking directly to me. These are my questions. These are my issues, and I need to find out these answers." So he wrote to Rabbi Hirsch and said, "I have to be more for you." And so he invited him to his home in Frankfurt at the time, and Gretz ended up living in his home for 3 years. He was a guest in his home, studying for 3 years, and had a huge impact on him. They would later have a painful break in which the teacher would repudiate the young Gretz, but that's getting ahead of the story a little bit. I want to show you something that's kind of like a visual. You saw this picture here. It's a famous, iconic picture of Hirsch when he was a young man. So I saw a version of this that was kind of in more lightweight publications, and they did this to it. Here he is. I think they felt that his beard was just a little bit too thin for I could use a touch up myself. I think maybe or something. But I just found that kind of amusing. Okay, anyways, that's where he received most of his education. Okay, questions to this point? Arguments, discussions? From German to English, the original was written in German. Yes, it was English.
What did I love that? So what did he say? I get him out of it.
No, absolutely. It was extremely popular in his lifetime. It was one of the something.
Did you say like the
question was, how was Hirsch's book received, and was it posthumously famous or while it was on? It was like an immediate classic. Because it's hard for us to understand this kind of situation because we live. Art Scroll started in the late 80s, right? And now it's, 40 years later? Oh my gosh, it's close to 40 years later. So we're so used to having tremendous amounts of Jewish literature available in fairly readable English. There it is. You want the Zohar, you want whatever it is, go pick it up. There's not so the Art Scroll, you can find it. But back then, in the beginning of the 19th century, in Germany, we should not overestimate the level of cultural illiteracy among Jews in Germany. That they were, as Isaiah says, mitzvahs ishmilada, a lot of them were just following the traditions because their parents did. They did not have deep textual information. They were not inspired by their faith. They just went along with emotions because that's what people did. And, you can only put up with that for a certain amount of time when you say, what is this all for? So when people like Hirsch would write in the vernacular, and people would pick it up and say, wait a minute, I had no idea how profound Judaism was. It was incredibly popular. Even more popular was his greatest work, which was translated into such a dense, difficult English. You really needed German to figure out some of the translation. But his great work, Horeb, which was named after Mount Sinai. Horeb is one of the names of Mount Sinai. And he essentially undertook a task that had not been done in 700 years of Jewish literature. Not since the Sefer Achidah was written in Barcelona by Rabbi anonymously. Hirsch went and wrote a philosophy of the mitzvot. Why do we do all these mitzvot, all these commandments? Very, very powerful and influential book, and continues to have an impact. Okay, so that hopefully answers your question. Does it? I hope so. What's your question? It just took a long time to answer. Okay, I got it. Okay, so anyways, now Hirsch was embroiled at the time in an incredibly difficult controversy that would ultimately resolve itself at least for the next couple hundred years in the expressions in Judaism. Judaism has experienced throughout its history several schisms where, for example, a group of Jews would reject the Talmud and they would form another group, what they call the Karaites. Before that, they're the Samaritans for different reasons. But by and large, we may have had ethnic divisions and cultural idiosyncrasies that are related to geographic settlement, but we never had like doctrinal divisions that split us into very distinct groups. You could perhaps say the Hasidic movement was one such group, although one of the key distinctions, as Rabbi Wine puts it, one of the key distinctions is Jews can argue about almost everything. The only time the debate gets kind of finalized is when they argue about who is Jew. You can argue about whether or not this is permissible or not permissible on the Sabbath, but when it gets to the point saying that my children cannot marry your children, then it feels like it's no longer a family argument. And so we're in that period right now in the 19th century, because ultimately one of the questions that would be raised is the issue of matrilineal versus matrilineal descent. What defines a Jew? A Jewish mother, a Jewish father, something else? We won't get into it deeply, but let's look at the major players and see how Rav Hirsch fits in, because of course this has a tremendous impact on immigrants. Who is regarded as the figurehead of what was then known as the liberal movement, later in America in particular is known as the Reform movement. Contrary to popular opinion, Geiger was not like a philosopher who came up with the idea that eventually formed the movement. He was rather a response to a grassroots movement that spread all over early 19th century Germany. There were many, many Jews who were looking at the possibility of emancipation, that is, of being given equal citizenship with Germans, as it happened in France in the late 18th century. And they felt that the only way we're going to do this is if we can prove to our non-Jewish co-citizens, so to speak, that we are deserving of citizenship, that we are normal people, that we have the same values, and that they can trust us, they can include us in, their vision of the united German people. And so this often was expressed as the jettisoning of Jewish cultural practices which were seen as non-Germanic. So, for example, the synagogue layout was completely changed so that there was no longer a separation between men and women. You had family seating with men and women in the same areas. The synagogue arrangement was also shifted around to make it more church-like, with instead of having the shofar in the center and the prayer leader having his back to much of the rest of the congregation. Apparently, he would stand at the front like a priest and face the congregation for much of the prayers and so on. A lot of changes like that to make, if a German Gentile walked into a Reformed synagogue, he would sort of understand what was going on. Of course, one of the big issues was the language of the prayer book, which would prove to be very seminal in creating a split, but I'll get to that in a second. So, at any rate, around him, already in the second decade, Germans around them, and that's what hopefully to look at it in a positive light, and that hopefully inspire millions or hundreds of thousands of Jews who were inspired by the tradition. Orthodox Judaism, the term of course had not been coined at that time. Orthodox Judaism had failed to inspire the youth, and so this was one response that proved to be the most popular at the time. This was the case until the 1840s, when at a convention of Reformed rabbis, again the term liberal was used then, one of the discussions revolved around the use of Hebrew religion, and there was a strong movement to simply change the language of the Bible completely in German. Most people simply did not understand the Hebrew, and why you come into synagogue just to repeat words that you have no idea what they mean. You can't use a translation on it just doesn't work. So therefore, there was a movement to simply remove Hebrew, and Zacharias Frankel, shown here, removed himself. He said, this is too radical a change. We do not approve of such a dramatic split from the traditional liturgy, and so he split from the Reform movement and created what was then called the historical positivist, or later in America, the conservative movement. So it's like a break off from the original Reform. And at the same time, just to make it more complicated, there's Moses Sofer, known as the Khatam Sofer in Eastern Europe. The other two figures are primarily in Germany. Moses Sofer is in northern Hungary. He looked at these things with a traditionalist viewpoint and said, this is completely inappropriate. And the modern society that is potentially making available to Jews all of the trappings of university education, non-Jewish culture, music, theater, dance, literature, and so on, it has to be completely walled off from our society, and therefore he said, we will not have any trouble with modernity whatsoever. And so this forms what we would call today the ultra-Orthodox response to modernity, which is kind of to shut it all out and to try not to engage in modernity, even when it doesn't necessarily look like it could be dangerous. So here we have three, if you include Rabbi Hirsch, four distinct approaches to modernity, and let's look at how Harmony Gretz fits in. So here I'm going to give you a very quick chart here. It looks like this. If you take a spectrum and you put on it on one side openness to outside culture, and you want to measure these various ideologies in terms of what do they believe about the outside world? Is it fundamentally toxic, or is it potentially beneficial for a Jew to be involved in cultural causes that are not necessarily Jewish in origin? And you go to the other side and you say, no, Jews have to remain totally insular. They have to stay away from anything that smacks of non-Jewish origins, and they have to stay totally within the framework of Jewish sources only. So if this is your spectrum from left to right, on the left side we put Reform and Abraham Geiger. In terms of the questions of how open to outside sources Reform would be, or Jews would be, this would be the most liberal of those approaches.
It's just a funny thing. My friend and I, when we were in that fucking
going to the opera, studying foreign philosophies, foreign religions, university, things like that, to find us on the side of the spectrum. On the other side, we have the so-called Charedim, which is a Hebrew term meaning the tremblers, the ones who tremble, and it's often translated to English as ultra-Orthodox. What that means also is there are two major forms, the so-called yeshivish, which is basically Lithuanian Talmudism, that we spoke about a few weeks ago, or the Hasidim, are both within this camp, and that would be Rabbi Moshe Sofer's approach. And then in the middle here, where you have a large number of Jews, you have what we would call today conservative, that is not as open to outside society as Reform is, and that's Zachariah Frankel's position. And then you have modern Orthodox, which is not as insular as the extreme ultra-Orthodox, meaning they value a level of engagement in society, but not so much, for example, that they would consider moving the Sabbath to Sunday or violating the laws of kashrut and so on. And that would be Rabbi Samson Hirsch. And basically, Jews in the 19th century, and today as well, had to kind of put themselves somewhere on this spectrum. Choice of this nature was not possible before the 19th century. Before the 19th century, Jews either had to conform to community standards or convert to Christianity. There was no secular Jewish identity. There was no, hybrid Jewish identity. You just did what was around you, or you faced social ostracism that could have, especially in the pre-modern period, it could actually have financial consequences, because the Beit Din could fine you for, let's say, smoking on Saturdays. So, smoking on Saturdays would count. Or the Beit Din could even have you lashed for failure to conform to community sensibilities. So Jews basically, went along with what was the community standard. Once you get to the 19th century and the possibility of choice was made available, that Jews did choose, and they put themselves somewhere on this chart. Okay, questions on yes, okay, not a hard one, please.
Elliot summons her from the elevator. Let's talk tomorrow.
West National
I am sure.
Noisy Peanut, where the gas card.
Travel such a long distance today.
Mafia Island,
We hug
Tanzania.
once more.
I'll restate that for the internet audience. The observation was related to the way a Jew would appear, to, in terms of dress and in terms of shaving the beard and things like that. And the quote about being a man at home and a Jew at home and a man in the street, it's been attributed to many different figures, including Moses Mendelssohn and Morton and others. I think it would be fair to attribute it to Samson Hirsch, but meanwhile, everyone on the internet is like, why are we looking at the Israeli flag for the longest time? Okay. So, anyways, lost my train of thought. Oh, yeah. So, the way you would look, so Hirsch would, for example, approve of it's forbidden by the Torah to take a straight edge razor to shave your beard. Use an electric razor for different reasons. It's basically considered like scissors, an electric razor. But to use a straight edge razor is forbidden by the Torah. So before electricity was invented, what did men do? So they either used a straight edge razor or they used depilatory powder. Like it's made of lye. It's painful and awful, right? But then you got a really clean shave. But those are the only two choices. So you could either subject yourself to the smelling and painful depilatory powder, or you broke Torah law and you used a straight edge razor. So most observant Jews grew a beard, but the ultra-Orthodox said, don't touch it at all. Let it grow wild, let it just, be, that's why many Hasidim today will allow their beards to grow untrimmed. But by Hirsch, of course, living in German society in an urban environment, that would look unkempt and inappropriate. So he said, take scissors, which is sort of a moderate approach, and trim your beard so you look like a mensch. And of course, you have people left. Abraham Geiger, who's clean shaven. I don't know how he did it personally, but that would be perfectly okay because the whole idea of the razor is not seen to have as much, moral authority as it would in the Orthodox tradition. Yes, question.
I have my son.
I whisper.
That is a very profound question, which I'll repeat for the audience. Do I think that the conservative reform movement saved many Jews from converting to Christianity? So, we don't have good data. We don't have good, census data or ballot polls to look at to ask people back then, why did you choose to affiliate with a Reform synagogue or a conservative synagogue or an Orthodox synagogue? We don't have that kind of data. That kind of thick description would help us understand. But there's basically two arguments, and I won't take a position on either of them. One argument is to say that the creation of these movements accelerated the rush to conversion, which was rampant in the late 19th century because it provided a way station. And you could, as it were, stop observing the Torah according to the traditional practice, and you see that nothing happens, no lightning bolts, and so therefore you just make the next step. Others would say that no, this was kind of like a safety net. Many Jews were faced with the choice of convert to Christianity or remaining Orthodox. They would definitely convert to Christianity. So those are the two positions. I'm not prepared to take a stance on it right now. Later on, we can talk about America, where we have the Pew study. We have a lot of data where we can ask that question again. I wonder what it means. But it's a very different environment because in the 19th century, everybody's buggy and zany were traditionally Orthodox. So it's like they were moving from something that they actually knew, as opposed to our generation, which doesn't necessarily have that background. Anyways, where's Tiger Prince and all this? Right over here in the middle, smack in the middle. Okay? He's obviously a huge devotee of Rabbi Hirsch, lived in his home for 3 years, was his personal student, and so you'd think he would be modern Orthodox, but he happened to agree very strongly with Rabbi Frankel of the conservative movement, who argued for adaptations to Jewish tradition, but not so fast. Keep a hold of Hebrew. He strongly supported the conservative movement. He also strongly supported which was a modern scholarly movement that Abraham Geiger was involved in. So he is leaning towards these positions on an intellectual level, really estranged him from his former teacher. Later, when he came out with his major magnum opus on Jewish history, that's when the break would be final, and Rav Hirsch would say that these are all very nice stories and imagination, but they're not necessarily true. And he really had nothing more to do with regrets at that point. But anyways, this is putting him on the spectrum. He's a former yeshiva boy from Poland. He grew up and spent his emerging adulthood in a modern Orthodox home, the modern Orthodox home under Rav Hirsch, and then he moved a little bit to the left because he influenced the Reform and Conservative movement. Okay, so let's go further on. Now, this is his greatest book, without question. The history of the Jews. This was a work that ended up extending over 10 volumes in the original German, and as I mentioned in the introduction, had a phenomenal impact on German Jewry. It was like just an earth-shattering book that took decades to complete. He actually started with volume 4, and then he filled in the later volumes, and then went back. And after a trip to Israel to actually be in the land of Israel, he wrote the volumes on biblical Israel. But by the time he was done, it was 10 massive volumes, a phenomenal achievement of scholarship. The reception, as I mentioned earlier, was immediate and very positive. And one of the reasons for this is because of his narrative. And this is something a little more sophisticated that I'm trying to explain to my more advanced history students, when they're working at the undergraduate level. One of the big misconceptions about how historians do their job is that we sort of kind of capture all these facts and then we put them all down. To quote one 18th century historian, yes, I guess the way it actually happened. Like, you need a good historian to go out and get good facts, put them in a what actually happened. But the problem is, it's not like that. The world of facts is kind of like the world of Google. Like, there's like so many, overwhelmingly many facts to choose from. And you have to sift through them, and you can't possibly look at them all because there are just way too many. And you have to try and tease out of the facts and you're able to see what are likely to be true and what constitute trends, what facts lead to one another. And then at some point you have to commit this to writing. Sometimes I like to explain this to my students as let's say you're writing the story of your own life. So if you wanted to write the story of your own life with mind-numbing accuracy, it would take you exactly as long as you have lived. Like, I'm 51 years old now, so I would have to put a tape recorder on my life for 51 years, 8 hours of sleep every night, everything. And that would be really the whole of my life story. But who would want much of that? I mean, that's ridiculous. You need a considerably condensed version. Nobody can take more than, let's say, 6 hours of my life. That's it. I thought that was funny, but okay. So historians have to make choices. What facts go in, what facts go out. And as soon as you make those choices, you create a narrative, a coherent story. The word story kind of meaning. There's a trajectory. It's not all one action after another. It seems to have some kind of flow and build up, and it seems to have a climax. And it's getting along. It seems like a literary work. That's how we like to think. That's how we remember things, and that's how we want our histories to work. So the narrative that Gretz started, and Gretz, you recall, was the pathbreaker here, because no one else had really written anything like this. He wrote what was later called by another encyclopedic historian, Salavaran, the lachrymose model of Jewish history. He did not mean it as a compliment. Lachrymose means full of tears. and put in a sentence the lachrymose model that Gretz promoted was that despite overwhelming and consistent persecution, Jews succeeded and contributed to world civilization by dint of their great intellect and superior moral standing. That's one sentence, the lachrymose model of Jewish history. So every time you talk about a period of Jewish history, you describe how the Jews were persecuted, and nevertheless they came out surviving and doing something good for society and being like a light unto the nations. This is a really good narrative. I like this narrative. It makes me feel good to be a Jew, right? Because you say, wow, look at all the tremendous suffering and awful and terrible things that happened to us, and yet, we're still, 7% of Nobel Prizes and things like that. That's the model. Now, there's a lot of good things to say about that model, and I think there's a lot of evidence to it. There's a lot of truth in it. But it is nevertheless very monolithic, and it also ignores anything that contradicts that tangent of the narrative. It contradicts when Jews maybe didn't necessarily live up to their moral standing, their moral standards that they have depicted in our literature. It ignores the times when Jews simply disappeared through assimilation or conversion to other faiths and never looked back. It ignores the pillars of Jewish history. All kinds of things, and it ignores also, by and large, the periods of time, which were unfortunately not that frequent, when Jews were actually very well treated in their societies. Certain period of time in Babylon, for example, certainly in Spain, modern America, which he didn't treat very much because of the period. So it is a somewhat limited model. But let's put it in the context. This is the very first model you're going to put out there. And if you are going to start with one narrative, this is a huge narrative to develop national consciousness. Because here you have these Jews who are on the verge of assimilating, on the verge of converting out, and when they read Gretz, they say, oh my gosh, like we said last week in German, right? In Russian, I'm so fortunate to be a Jew. You read Gretz and you say, my gosh, thank you, Bobby and Sadie, for buying me this book for my bar mitzvah present. And actually, the copy I have in my library, I have a personal copy of the 1899 printing in English, and it's beautiful with leather covers and binding and stuff like that. And on the front page, it's a bar mitzvah present to some boy. I won't mention his name because maybe his ancestors might watch this video one day. And then volume 2 has uncut pages. Back then they used to make the books with the pages actually sealed on the outside, and you had to take a sharp knife and cut them open. So obviously he didn't make it to the second volume. But nevertheless, that's really what this book was about, and it made a huge splash in the Jewish world because it was like, it made everyone so proud to be a Jew, and it was written in German with properly sourced materials at a very high level. And this is, by the way, for a person who was not allowed to get a PhD at his university of choice because they simply had a policy, no PhDs for Jews. Sorry, question about
harder this time. And Christian releases me.
Absolutely. His religious perspective is essentially like this slide we have over here. That, he's like Zacharias Frankel, and by the way, both of these guys were historians too. Not encyclopedic like this, but he takes a critical approach to the sources. Like, for example, just because the Talmud says something happens, he doesn't automatically believe it did. He wants to look for outside ramifications, he wants to look for inner interpretations, things like that. So he takes the Talmud as a source, but not necessarily as authoritative. And that makes him more of a modern historian who will approach sources with that kind of critical eye. He is religious in the sense that he believes in God, he believes in Jewish destiny, he believes in the value of the Torah, although not necessarily in the literal interpretation of the Torah as received by the Orthodox. He's very Orthodox friendly compared to other historians, but he's not like, a Bible thumper, so to speak. Okay, yes, Fred. It was published, thank you, serially. He published the 4th volume first, a couple of years later the 5th, 6th, went up to I think the 9th, and then his trip to Israel in 1972 was that. He wrote volumes 1, 2, 3, and then he came up with the final final volume in, I think, 1877. So he wrote it, in a kind of a haphazard fashion, and then it was immediately translated, printed, several editions, abridged, things like that. And I don't know how many times it was reprinted, but literally tens, maybe 100 times reprinted. Different languages. Okay, the last question, and we better go on. The one that's most popular in English is it's done by a woman. Her first name is Bella. I think her last name is Rose, if I remember correctly. Published by the Jewish Publication Society, 1899 to 1905. I wish I could remember her last name, I'm sorry. That's a hard question, though. We don't allow hard questions here, just easy questions. The idiosyncrasies and biases associated. There are a few things you can definitely, any work of this size, you're going to find points to criticize. And I'm not going to nitpick about, facts, but in terms of his sort of biases. Do you recognize the picture on the article here, the title page? Moses Mendelssohn, right? Not a coincidence, because Moses Mendelssohn is exactly the kind of figure that's a hero for Reds, right? Because Mendelssohn, he's persecuted, not allowed to get into schools, not allowed to get, but he's so brilliant, he beats Immanuel Kant in an essay competition, so it shows the world what you can do. So Mendelssohn is definitely his kind of hero. And anything that didn't really fit with the Mendelssohnian view of the world was not necessarily well presented in Red. So, for example, he thinks Kabbalah is total nonsense, and he says, why are we even talking about this stuff? So, Kabbalah is presented as superstitious nonsense that, it's an unfortunate kind of byproduct of excessive persecution that we retreat to mysticism. Hasidim, he thought they were all bumbling idiots, not well educated at all, and expressing themselves in all kinds of narishkeit. And unfortunately, once again, it's because of the Chmielnicki rebellion that destroyed the communities. They didn't have proper teachers, never they couldn't learn German. So he has, in general, a fairly low opinion of Eastern European Jews. Again, remember where he comes from, in that Bosnian region where the Jews are Germanotropic. And he looks at these Jews who can't even speak proper German, that they have so much Polish and Ukrainian Russian mixed in there. He wants nothing to do with them. So he was also tended to be very weak in social history. Like, he was very much a proponent of the so-called great man in history model that believes that history, all of us kind of like just sort of follow great men, usually white men. We follow what they say, and we'll follow along behind until another great white man says something else, and then all of us will be able to move over and follow that white man. So his history tends to be a lot of disjointed biographies, as opposed to later historians like Shimon Dugno, who really emphasized folk movements and really emphasized the power of the masses, not necessarily the leaders, for shaping Jewish history. So the history as itself has some weaknesses, but again, placing it in context of an incredible achievement for its time. Now, there were some decidedly negative, what's the right word, things that happened. The word in Hebrew is totzal, it must be the word in English. Consequences, thank you. Great consequences for his work. Most of it came from this man here, Heinrich von Treitschke, who was the leading German encyclopedic historian of the time. The Germans, who were about 100 years ahead of the Jews when it came to writing books of this nature. And von Treitschke read Granz's book and was incensed. He said, I can't believe how this Jew is portraying himself in Christian culture, and especially in German culture. How dare he present himself as being like Jesus, as being persecuted generation after generation, and what chutzpah, he actually didn't use the word chutzpah, that what nerve he has to proclaim the Jews' superior moral standing despite his persecution. He says that is so false. Jews, we have tolerated them, he says, in German society, and they are a scourge on our society. They have, ruined our cities, they have infiltrated increasingly our universities, our economies are torn up by their petty doing so on, and von Treitschke just chewed into Reds as a kind of a national ideologue that didn't write history, he wrote propaganda. So if you remove all of the venom, if you remove all of the hatred and anti-Semitism that Montrachko was expressing, his historical criticism of Gretz was not so far off. Gretz was writing a national history that was kind of like, like, for example, when you write a national anthem for a country like that, right? Are you going to write, America the Beautiful? America the Pretty Good Looking, right? You're not going to write America the Pretty Good, America the Beautiful. You're going to use the superlative, right? You're not going to say, God tolerate America. You say, God bless America. That's the point of a national anthem. So too, he's writing a book that's like a historical version of a national anthem. And it's supposed to be uplifting. It's supposed to make Jews feel good about who they are. He's not trying to write a dry scholarly treatise. There's like drama to it. It's a good read today. It really is. And von Treitschke would have none of it. He felt that it was trite. He felt that it was insulting to the Germans who had hosted the Jews for 800 years. And ultimately he said the opposite. He coined this phrase, which you see here in this Nazi rally from the 1930s. The Jews are our misfortune. And this was one of Hitler's favorite slogans, borrowed from von Treitschke, who was criticizing Gretz, who was saying, au contraire, it's not like you say, Mr. Gretz, that the Jews have been such a boon to whatever society they're in. They have been a cancerous growth and eat away from the society from within. And von Treitschke essentially trotted out this whole diatribe against Jews and how dangerous they are for society that was incredibly influential in the society. You should also understand that von Treitschke was not some crazy drunken person muttering in the street. This was one of Germany's most prominent academics, a very prominent university late in his career, and for him to stand up and take such a strong stance against Gretz was perceived by many Germans as authoritative. So they had a fight called the Historiker Strike, a historians' battle that went on for close to a decade, back and forth in the press, and people in Germany took sides. People who were not involved but otherwise, began to engage in this dialogue of were Jews good for Germany or not. A very, very sad story that, of course, would come to its culmination with the Holocaust half a century later. Here's another, I'll show you, by the way. I don't know why the Germans like to repeat themselves, because the Jews are on girls, and women and girls, the Jews are on that portion. It just reminds me of a small funny incident. My wife and I were once in Odessa, and the water was not working in the hotel, and so there was a sign by the elevator, and it said in Russian, the water is not working, and it said in Ukrainian, the water is not working. Then it said in European languages, like in French, the water isn't working, it should be on again tomorrow. The same kind of thing in English. And then in German, it said the water isn't working, the plumber came, he says we need new pipes, he's going to have to order them from Kiev, it'll take till tomorrow, we hope we'll have it by 5 o'clock. Like the Germans wanted the whole story.
Sometimes you drive to Chicago.
Anyways, here's another slide, also from it's 1935, I believe. This is an outdoor billboard for an anti-Semitic paper called Der Stürmer, and here you can see the phrase, the Jews are our misfortune, meaning that everything that's wrong in Germany is because we have the Jews here in our society. And just to make it a little scarier, here is the same slogan, and this is from the National Socialist Democratic Workers' Party, also known as the Nazi Party, in Lincoln, Nebraska. Nobody knew that they were there, but they're also quoting that same slogan of von Treitschke, which was essentially an attack on Heidegger press. streets.
As
So, to think about his legacy. Okay, Esteban, and then his legacy.
I love you so much, and I'm suddenly overcome by the enormity of my
They were
love.
contemporaries, roughly the same age, and
I will
von
spend
Treitschke,
the
a
rest
great
of my
elder
life
statesman,
loving
a great
you.
historian, well respected across the country, and Gretz older at that
Is that
time
the
as well,
best
but
thing?
the author was incredibly well
Cathartic
received.
orgasm, crying
Their
out together
contemporaries
as
is a really
tears
nasty
flow
fight.
down my cheeks.
Now,
He reaches his
how did
climax and
Jews
pours
take
himself
this
into me.
fight? Unfortunately, Gretz suffered some tremendous humiliation late in his life as a result of this fight. You recall that one of the collective projects of German Jews for most of the 19th century was to desperately try to fit in, to desperately try to demonstrate to Germans that Jews are worthy of citizenship. And to a certain degree, Gretz's project fits within that model. But the huge embarrassment that many Germans felt with the rejection of Gretz by the scholarly community was so intense that in 1885, when a major institution was developed to study German Jewry by a so-called Jewish Historical Commission, they pointed forward to invite Gretz to participate, which was like he was the Nobel Prize winning nuclear physicist of the era, and they're not even sending him an invitation to participate. It was a huge slap in the face for Gretz, but it said a lot about what the Jewish community thought of him. They were, at this point, frankly embarrassed by his achievements because it had caused so much negative attention. His reputation extended internationally. French translations and English translations did not have the same kind of qualms about his fight with von Treitschke, because in America and in France, Jews had already learned equal rights. And so his reputation was solid there, but he was humiliated in his own country. But that nevertheless does not diminish the tremendous achievement that he made in his great 10-volume history of the Jews. He eventually succumbed to a heart disease and was buried with significant honors.
So now I think you do
Rockwell,
have to have
remember correctly, and we remember him even today.
I think the same would be the same in space.
Preparing for this lecture
Really?
tonight,
You don't
I
need
think
this
I'm going to have to
fucking
go back and
appendix.
reread my
What
Gretz.
was it?
So the pages that were not cut in volume 2, maybe I'll cut them myself
There are
this
some
time. And I
organs
guess
of
that's
the human
about
body.
it. For watching, sorry, thank you very much for participating, and I look forward to seeing you next week when I hope to speak about the freedom one of the most important Chabad rabbis of the late 19th and early 20th century. Okay, have a great night.
I kiss his neck, bends down and kisses my cheek.
And
After a moment, he shifts.
yeah, so to avoid that, I think they would just remove some people.
I lean back and arch an eyebrow at his choice of words. He cocks his head to one side and smirks at me. I have something to say, Miss Stew. I shake my head and rise unsteadily to my feet.
They recommend it.
I am sitting up in bed.
Appendix wisdom
Christian
teeth.
insists on drying my hair. He is quite thrilled at it. How that happened is an unpleasant thought, so I dismiss it.
Anything else you have to
It's
have?
after 2 in the morning, and
I really
I
think
am
so.
ready to sleep. Christian gazes down at me and re-examines each sheet before climbing into bed.
Actually, not
He
lose
shakes his head,
nails and space.
incredulous once more.
So it's the same pressure on the fingertips.
He glances at me, his eyes soft and warm. Better by my side, she says to me, tell me.
That's good.
I would have told you earlier, but since it was going to be your birthday, he pushes me down the bedside table and snuggles me beside him, pulling me into his arms against his chest so that we're sleeping. I smirk, though he can't see my expression. I am far from perfect, Christian.
Low early night still needs the fact
I giggle. Can I ask you something? Of course. He nuts my nuts.
Alright, I should be like, oh, if you can ever get the fuck out of
Sit
your
back in
room,
Portland.
you might have to
Was that
until then, I'm off to Florence, kids. Ready? Oh yeah. Why?
Christian says nothing. I turn to face him, and his eyes are wide. You know how ridiculous that is?
Anybody
How
do
much
that?
stress you put your family and me through?
Really?
Oh, I love you very much. He blinks a couple of times and then gives me a when are you going to get it through your thick skull that you are loved? Thick skull. His eyebrows widen in surprise. I nod. Yes, thick skull. I don't think the bone density in my head is significantly higher than anywhere else in my body. I'm serious. Stop trying to make me laugh. I am still a little mad at you. Though that's partially eclipsed by the fact that you're all safe and sound when I thought. My voice fades as I recall those anxious few hours. Well,
Are you
what
sure?
I thought. His eyes soften and he reaches up to caress my face. I'm sorry.
Are you sure? I think it was probably actually your mother.
It's very
I
sweet.
couldn't take the truth.
I whisper. He smiles shyly. I've never seen her that way.
What way did you
He
do it?
blinks at the memory.
Okay, I think that's it for the general
She
introduction.
wanted me so something's else. What a shock.
Yeah. I took Main Street.
Everyone loves him. I smile. Perhaps now you start believing it. I bend down and kiss him gently. Happy birthday. I'm glad you're here. I smirk. He says, astounded. His face erupts into a grin. Oh yes, Mr. Gray. But you'll have to wait until then. I wake suddenly from a dream or nightmare, and my pulse is thumping. I turn and to my relief, Christian is fast asleep beside me.
So I can take Harvey to the shore.
Stirred, reaches out to his sleep, laying his arm over me. He rests his head on my shoulder, sighing softly. The room is flooded with light. It's hot. Christian never sleeps this late. I lie back and let my racing heart calm. Why the anxiety? After that from last night, I turn and stare at him. He's thinking. I take a deep, steady breath and look at his lovely face. A face that is now so familiar. All its dips and shadows eternally etched on my mind. He looks much younger when he's asleep, and I grin because today is a whole year older. I hug myself, thinking about my present. What will he do? Perhaps I should start by eating breakfast in bed. Besides, Jose should still be here. I find Jose at the counter, using a bowl of cereal. I can't help but flush when I see her. She knows I spent the night with Christian. Why do I suddenly feel so shy? It's not as if I'm naked or I'm wearing my four-legged silk wrap. Morning, Jose. I smile, raising it out. Hey, Anna! His face lights up, genuinely pleased to see me. There's no hint of teasing or salacious intent in his expression. Sleep well? I ask. Sure. Selfie from up here. Yeah, it's pretty special. Like the owner of this apartment. I get to see selfie. It's Christian's birthday today. I'm making breakfast in bed. No, I think he's fried from yesterday. I quickly glance away from him. He had to the fridge. He can't see my lunch. Jose. When I take the eggs and bacon out of the fridge, Jose is grinning at me. I purse my lips. I love him, Jose. His eyes widen momentarily, then he grins. What's not to like? He asks, gesturing around the great ring. I scowl at him. Gee, thanks. Do I always have this love that I marry a Christian for his money? Seriously, I'm kidding. Never been that kind of girl. All right, good for you? asked,
that I
changing
want
the
to see.
subject. I don't want to argue.
Fucking video. Like, what is that gonna be like? Generally, it's gonna be
Christian says as he saunters into the living room.
feel like
He's wearing only pajama bottoms that hang in her
it's gone wild. We're doing
turns to me and
British,
smirks as I stare.
milk, it's gone.
He's doing this on purpose. I narrow my eyes, desperately trying to recover my equilibrium, and Christian's expression alters subtly. He knows that I know what he's up to. He doesn't care. I was going to bring breakfast to bed. Swaggering over, he wraps his arm around me, tilts my chin up, plants a loud, wet kiss on my lips. Very friendly. He says, I want to scowl at him and tell him to behave, but it's his birthday. I flush. Why is he so territorial? Good morning, Krishna. Happy birthday. I give him a smile and he smirks at me. He says, and that's it. I flush the color of the red balloon and glance nervously at Suzanne. It looks like he's swallowed something unpleasant. I turn away and start preparing. Christian asks, casually, as he sits down on a bar stool. I pick up his cigar and touch me and Christian bounds. You know each other? They were in the army together. They lost contact with Japan and I were in college. It's funny. They're best buddies now. We're going fishing. Christian is checking his interest in ventures. Some brain touches with his movement watches. His heads feel quick. My brother Elliot and I landed a 34-pound steelhead once. They're talking fishing? What is it about fishing? I have never understood it. 34 pounds? Not bad. And a spotted dog? Holds the record. 43-pounder. Kidding. You never said.
Did you ever want to look
Happy
at
birthday, by the way. Thanks. So, where do you like to fish?
it? Was there. It was
I
right
zone
there.
out.
It was nice.
This I do not need to know. But at the same time, I'm relieved. See, Christian, Jose's not so bad.
Is it because
By the time Jose makes to leave, both of them are much more relaxed with each other. Christian quickly changes into t-shirt and jeans, and barefoot, he accompanies Jose into the foyer. Thanks for letting me last year, Jose says to Christian as they shake hands. Anytime. Christian smiles. Jose hugs me quickly. Stay safe, Anna. Sure, great to see you. Next time, we'll have a real evening out. Oh, he waves at us from inside the elevator.
God, that fucking thing says, hey, your fucking battery's going down here.
Not so bad. He still wants us to repent exam.
Yo,
But I can't
when you're
say
famous, what's the first thing you're gonna do?
that's not true. You have
Are you gonna
no
fuck
idea.
like something first of all?
He smirks down at me. He wants me to.
No.
I frown. Christian, he's just a friend. A good friend. And I'm suddenly aware that I sound like Christian when he's talking about Mrs. Robinson. That is unsettling. Christian holds up his hands in a placating gesture. I don't want to fight, he says softly. Oh, we're not fighting, are we? Me neither. Should you tell me you're married? No, I figured I ought to tell Mom and Ray first. Shit, it's the first time I thought about this since I said yes. What are my parents going to say? Christian nods. Yes, you're right. And I should ask you something. I laugh. Oh, Christian, this isn't the 18th
When you
century.
wear a suit, like who do you want to look? Sydney Porterville, Sydney 48, and guess who's calling for dinner? Guess who's calling for dinner? And look who's calling for dinner. Look who's calling for dinner.
I want to hear you, sir.
Really?
Distract him. The thought of my presence is burning a hole in my consciousness. I need to give it to him and see how he reacts. He gives me his shy smile, and my heart skips a beat. For as long as I live, I'll never tire of looking at that smile. He sighs and pulls on my chin. A thrill runs through my body as his fingers touch me. Without a word, and while I still have a modicum of courage, I take his hand and lead him back to the bed. I drop his hand, leaving him stand by the bed, and from under my side of the bed, I take out two living gift boxes. He says, surprised. I take a deep breath. I bought this before the incident yesterday. I'm not sure about it now. I quickly hand him one of the parcels before I change my mind. He gazes at me, puzzled, sensing my uncertainty. I nod. Christian tears off the packaging, seals his eyes in the box. Trying to take notes. I whisper. He grins. The box contains a small wooden helicopter with a large silver bar. He opens it up. Wow. And before I know it, he's sitting on the bed assembling it. It sounds together quickly, and Christian holds it up in the palm of his hand. A blue wooden helicopter. He looks up at me with his glorious, all-American boy smile. Then heads to the window so that the little helicopter is observing the sunlight, and the rotor starts to say, he holds it at eye level, watching the blades spin. He's fascinated, and fascinated to watch as he amuses himself in thought, staring at the little helicopter. What is he making? You like it? He grabs me, kisses me swiftly, then turns back to watch the rotor spin. I'll add it to the light in my office, he says distractedly, watching the blades spin. He takes his hand out of the sunlight, and the blades slow down and come to a stop. I can't help my face split a grin, and I want to hug myself. He loves it. Of course, it's all about alternative technologies. I've forgotten that in my haste to desire it. Placing it on the chest of drawers, he turns to face me. Hugging myself is childish. Is it practical? I know. I hope so. I am shocked at myself with a small flame of jealousy I feel for an inanimate object. My subconscious snorts with derisive laughter. I ignore her. What's in the box? He asks, his eyes wide with almost childish excitement. Holy fuck. I'm not sure if this present is for you or me. Really? He asks, and I know I have piqued his interest. Nervously, I hand him the second box. He shakes his head and pulls through a heavy rattle. He glances up at me. Why are you so nervous? He asks. I shrug, embarrassed and excited as I work. He raises an eyebrow. He whispers, and his voice runs right. Desire and anticipation swelling in my belly. I haven't said until I know reaction. He narrows his eyes suspectfully. I remain tight-lipped as I hold him flesh. He removes the lid of the box and takes out the small card. The rest of the contents are wrapped in tissue. He opens the card, his eyes dart quickly to mine. Why do you feel shocked or surprised? I just don't know. He murmurs. I nod and swallow. He cocks his head to one side warily, assessing my reaction, and frowns. Then he turns his attention back to the box. He tears through the pale blue tissue paper, pushes out an eye mask, some nipple clamps, a butt plug, his iPod, his silver gray tie, and last, but by no means least, his favorite. He gazes at me, his expression dark and unbelievable.
Let's get into it, guys.
So bad. He asks softly, yes, I understand. Yes. Could my voice sound any smaller? Myriad motions across his face, none of which I can place. But subtle for enemies. Not quite the reaction I was expecting. He asks, Dr. Witt said stuff. I understand that. Yes, then. I'm sure. He shakes his head and gazes down at the contents of the box. Sex mad and insatiable. Well, I think we can do something with this lot. He murmurs almost to himself. He puts the contents back in the box. When he glances at me again, his expression has completely changed. How? His eyes frown. His mouth lifts in a slow, erratic smile. He holds out his hand. Now, he says, and it's not a request. My belly clenches, tight
Get started. Thank you all for coming. I apologize that I was a little bit delayed today and people standing outside. That's not unusual. So, if you follow the website, you get the regular page on the website, you know that I have 2 other series of lectures that I put online at the same time. I have these lectures, which are basically 1-hour biographies, and then I have this series, which is mainly directed at undergraduate students, called the Essential Lecture Series, and they're about 20 to 30 minutes, and then I have these This Week in Jewish History, which are like 3 to 8 minutes. So I just recorded one this week on the origins of modern Jewish humor, and I'm really pleased. One of the essential lectures, I'm really pleased that I got so many responses in the comments. And within 6 hours, 172 people have viewed this video. It's amazing what the internet can do. And one of the best things is that people started sending jokes in the comments box. So it's like, so here's one from Daniel Nuria, who's actually quite a scholar. He's the first one, if I remember correctly, to find out that the letter Ch is not a guttural. It's a voiceless fricative. He didn't know that. But he pointed out this one joke which I enjoyed. It turned out that this is a very old Jewish joke, and just about everyone I told it to already knows it, but somehow I missed it. So, there's a Chiloni man in Tel Aviv, a secular Jew in Tel Aviv, who is, very, very far from his Jewish origins and Jewish rituals and traditions. And, that's the way he chooses to live his life. But he's a businessman and he has a huge deal on the line. And this is a deal that he does it right. He's going to be set for retirement. Everything's going to work out just long as he can just sign this one deal. And he's running a little late and he's driving down to Dizengoff and he's driving around and around the office building where he's supposed to have his meeting. And he can't get a parking spot. He realizes there's a huge crisis here. Oh my gosh, what's going on? What am I going to do? So finally, in desperation, he raises his eyes heavenward and he says, I've never kept the laws of Kashrut and I've never kept the Shabbat. But now, please help me with this one. Give me a parking spot, and I will be faithful with you. And just as he finishes saying that, amazing, a car just pulls out right in front of the building where he needs to park. I said, never mind, I thought, what? Alright, so the wonders of the internet. Tonight's topic is rather unusual. I thought about doing this particular figure in the past, but since last week we spent so much time talking about Jersey Pearl, who was a very bitter and rather venomous critic of the Hasidic movement. And we spoke about Rabbi Nachman of Breslov in that connection because it was the publication of one of Rabbi Nachman's most important and unusual works, the Sipuri Ma'asiyot, which we'll talk about tonight. I thought, well, why don't we talk about Rabbi Nachman tonight as a way to kind of get the side of where Joseph Pearl was coming from in his critique. And you can evaluate it for yourself. We try to avoid moral judgments in this room. But we try to give you the historical outline of his life, and you can decide exactly how you want to go on that controversy between the two of them. So Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, definitely one of the most unconventional, creative, seminal thinkers of the Hasidic movement, highly criticized in his lifetime and beyond, and yet with the possible, probable exception of the Chabad Lubavitch movement, undoubtedly the best known of all the Hasidic great leaders. The Breslov movement amazingly has continued to hold its own, and in fact even flourish without a Rebbe. They are known to their detractors in the Hasidic world as their Toiter Hasidim, the dead Hasidim, because they don't follow a living Rebbe. But nevertheless, they show tremendous creativity, effervescence, and novelty that indicate that their trajectory is still on the way up. So we're going to spend a little bit of time thinking about who was this particular individual, what were his contributions, what were some of the reasons for which he was so bitterly criticized during his lifetime, and maybe we'll spend a little bit of time thinking about the specific nature of his spiritual creativity that caused such inspiration in the Jewish world in the early 19th century and for the last 200 years. Okay, so he has impeccable Hasidic ethos, impeccable Hasidic lineage. His grandfather was the Baal Shem Tov himself through the Baal Shem Tov's daughter, and on the other side he was the grandchild of one of the Baal Shem Tov's primary disciples as well. So he has like really tremendous standing with the movement. And more than that, he was born and raised in Medjugorje. So look at this map here. This is going to cover most of his life, so I'm putting all these places here. Medjugorje is the current Ukrainian pronunciation. You may have seen the Polish pronunciation, Medjugorje. This is a small shtetl over here in the Tarnovo region of western Ukraine. This is eastern Galicia, a region where Jews are exceptionally poor compared to the rest of Europe. Poor both in terms of their per capita income. This is one of those areas of Europe where Jews were much more involved in manual labor and even in farming, which is highly unusual for Jews than in the rest of Europe. At the time, it was not part of Ukraine as shown here. At the time, it was part of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Later, it would become part of Austrian Galicia and so on. And then after World War I, it would be part of Poland, right on the Austrian. So Medjugorje over here. He spent some time in the Kiev region, in the region of Podil, and in a neighboring town as well. And then he made his name, his fame, really in the town known as Bratslav, not to be confused with Bratislava, and it's usually pronounced in Yiddish as Breslov. The term Breslov is just a Yiddish, there are many of these. One of the hardest things about figuring out the geography of Eastern Europe, of my own teacher, Professor Paul Robert Magaji of Toronto, he wrote an atlas of Eastern Europe, and he described to me how incredibly difficult it is because just about whenever a place gets conquered by a people, they change the name of the place. And sometimes the name change is really quite distinct. Like, for example, if you take this town here, which is written in this map as Lviv, that's the Ukrainian pronunciation. This is a map of Ukraine. In the local dialect, it was known as the to Poles and Lemberg as the Germans. And so Jews would choose whichever one they want. Lemberg is often used because of the affinity with Germany. But these place names change tremendously. So Bratslav is one of those examples where the Jews would simply elide the terms to say Breslov. And one of the reasons they loved it is because the term Breslov, if you look at the letters in Hebrew, it forms an anagram for Leib Basar. heart of flesh, as opposed to a lay Evan, a heart of stone, which is an allusion to a passage in the Bible and Isaiah where God says, I will take out this heart of stone and I will give you a heart of flesh, a heart of lay basar. So Breslov, lay basar, that's who we're talking about. Spent a lot of time in Breslov, and that's where he gathered most of his disciples, and then his last days were spent in Uman, where he chose to die and be buried. So the pilgrimages, if you've heard of them, are associated with Uman, not with the other locations there. So his Hasidic lineage, underlying the point we started with, is not only from his actual family members, which go, he's in the third generation after the Baal Shem Tov, who passed away about 1760. Rabbi Nachman was born 12 years later. But he actually grew up in the very heartland of Hasidic world in Medjugorje, a place where the Baal Shem Tov himself was active. And so you get a sense of where he exists in the panoply of figures. Yeah, typical for the time, very early engagement. Again, he was like Hasidic royalty, so he would have been very sought after. He was engaged at 13, and in kind of like a Talmudic precedent, which was not so unusual in the 19th century or at least late 18th century, he was married 1 year later to the daughter of a fairly wealthy man from the Kiev region. He moved in with his father-in-law, and this is incidentally one of the reasons why there's a huge population explosion among Jews in Eastern Europe in the 19th century, far outstripping the non-Jewish population in the area. It is two things. First of all, the development of the smallpox vaccinations, which Catherine the Great began to disseminate in the late 18th century, and secondly, an institution known as Kest, which was a way in which young married couples, and we're talking about really young, we're talking about 14, 13 years old, where they would live for extended periods of time in their in-laws' homes with an extended family that has cousins, aunts, sister-in-laws and mother-in-laws and so on to care for children during these very tender years when the husband and wife are really children themselves. So he lived in this kind of environment for the first few years of his married life. It turned out later, though, that his father-in-law became a widower, and his second wife and Rabbi Nachman did not get along all that well. So at this point, Rabbi Nachman took his wife and his growing family. He ultimately had 6 children, 4 girls and 2 boys. The boys did not survive infancy, but his 4 daughters did. So he moved nearby. In this area, though, in these formative years of his early marriage, is when you see some of the characteristic elements of his thought begin to emerge. He followed what he felt was an extremely unique path in Hasidic thought, and certainly when he began his literary oeuvre, you can see that he's plowing completely new paths in the fields of Jewish mysticism. At the same time, he was following a very traditional path of going out into forests alone. He became quite an oarsman. He went on the Dnipro River, which is shown here, and he would, row himself up and down the river and set the boat ashore, and then he would go off for an afternoon and simply meditate on nature and existence in the world. And this is the roots of a spiritual practice that was associated with Breslov forever after, called hitbodedut. This comes from the word boded or bad, which means to be alone. Hitbodedut means to make oneself alone. And one of the main areas of Breslov's spiritual exercises is to spend a good chunk of time. When you read some of their literature will say, just take an hour for yourself. That's all it takes, an hour a day, which, for the rest of us non-Breslov Hasidim, it's a huge amount of time, especially for a Litvak, a whole hour doing this. And basically, be alone, talk to yourself, talk to God, talk to the walls, talk to your future, talk to your past. Just spend an hour in internal meditation.
I try to hide
That
my
may be,
smile.
by the way, jumping
There was
into
a
the end of this
time,
lecture,
not very long
one of the
ago,
reasons
when I
why
would have been
in the
subdued by his
1970s Breslov
I would
Hasidus
never
became
have had
so
the nerve to
popular
kiss him.
is because the whole
While he was in
meditative
his room.
tradition, which they had been
I
developing
realize
for
now
several hundred years,
I'm no
was
longer
so
intimidated
well
by him.
aligned with the age of
It's a
Aquarius,
revelation.
with
My
EST,
grand used to
you
this
recall
life,
all those
and he
kinds of
smirks at me.
unusual New Age
He
practices that
growls
were popular
and
in
stands
America at
back.
the time.
He
So
looks at me
definitely
and
there was
slaps
a
me on the
kind of
face across the
continuity of
hall.
practicing thought
I want
between
his
the
there.
and
Listen
the
to
modern
his
day meditative
actions.
techniques.
I try for
So
contrite, and
he
I think
moved
I
to a
succeed.
nearby region,
He
and at
approaches
this
me again.
point, in his late teens and early 20s, he began
And
to
leans
attract
behind me once
disciples.
more with the cuffs. I
Jumping
resist
ahead
touching
also,
him, but
you should
inhale
note
his
that the
glorious
entire
Christian
span of his
scent.
life was only a
He's
short
still fresh from
38
last night's
years,
shower.
and yet compressed within this
I
very
should
short
follow
lifetime,
this.
he managed to
I expect him to
create a
hug my
tremendous
wrist,
body
but
of
he touches
written
me
work,
and cuff around my
very creative
elbows.
and unusual
It
and
makes me
original,
arch my back,
and attract
pushing
many
my breasts
totally
forward
devoted
until my
disciples who would
elbows are
remain
lined
with him not only
together. When
during
he's
his
finished,
lifetime, but
he
even
stands
after
back
his
to
death,
admire me.
which was shrouded with tremendous controversy and would pursue the
It's not
development
the
of the movement
most
past that.
comfortable
So
of positions,
these are all
but
very
I'm
young
so
people. We're
wired
talking
in
about people in their
anticipation to
teens
see
and
where
early
he's going with
20s
this,
when they're
that I
at their
nod,
peak of creativity.
wanting.
The controversy.
He
So
pulls the mask from his
he
back.
was, we have to put ourselves within the context of the times. And you recall
He
that
slides the mask over my head, covering my eyes. My breathing
the
slackens.
Hasidic movement
Wow.
heads into
Why is not being able to see
period which
so
historians might call it Fermi
I
Law,
am here.
which is a reference to a month in the brief-lived French revolutionary calendar. Basically, when you have a revolution of any sort, there's a period of tremendous excitement and exuberance and dramatic change, like the pendulum is pulled all the way in one direction. And then, as people get kind of fed up with the ridiculous pace of change, then the pendulum swings back the other way, but often goes into the opposite direction. And if you look at any, this is kind of like a well-known pattern, a cycle of history. If you look at, let's say, the Russian Revolution, it may start with all these bright ideas of Drushba Narodov, the friendship of peoples, and a neo-messianic era, and then it eventually swings back and falls into high Stalinism, which is the thermidor, as it were, of the Soviet Revolution. So the Hasidic movement had much of the same. The 18th century was a tremendous period of criticism of the old way of doing things, a period of great innovation. And then by the time we get to the 19th century, some of the excesses that the Hasidic movement had created to react against began to reassert themselves and even infiltrate the Hasidic movement itself. For example, one of the aspects of the Hasidic movement that was so powerful in the 18th century was the tremendously democratizing element of following a charismatic leader as opposed to an appointed figure that had the approval of the community and the lord of a particular region. You have a person who just had a beautiful smile and a beautiful way of expressing things and a kind heart, and he would become the Rabbi, obviously with tremendous talents in learning and pastoral skills and so on. But by the time you get to the mid-19th century, the Hasidic system was criticized for being excessively rigid, of being not just another hierarchy where people gather their courts around them on a hereditary basis and so on. So this is a period when the Hasidic movement is just beginning to kind of lose that populist edge and descend into a dark and reified period, which again they would emerge from at the end of the 20th century, but that's not for us today. So Rabbi Nachman was at this period when it's quite a bit of time. It's 40, 50 years after the death of the founder of the movement, and you have established figures, you have Hasidic leaders who are elderly typically and have followed the same kind of pattern, establishing courts and rituals such as the Trillionaires of bringing certain types of donations to the Hasidic leaders and so on. And Rabbi Nachman just had none of this. He is a huge critic of the existing Admorim, as the leaders of the Hasidic movement were called, and he openly criticized their mystical pronouncements. So, for example, some of the Admorim, some of the leaders would say that they had gotten a glimpse of Elijah's chariot that's referred to in the Bible, and it's an allusion to his mystical vision of Godhead in the universe. And Rabbi Nachman will say, I don't know how these people could say they've seen the chariot and they describe it this way, because I know myself, it looks totally different than the way they're talking about it. So open criticism of his hearers and his seniors. In fact, one of the most what's the right word? One of the most acrimonious disputes he had was with a figure known as the Shpoda, the elder of the city of Shpoda. And Rabbi Nachman moved to that city without first getting permission from the Shpoda. And originally, the Shpoda was open to the idea of Rabbi Nachman, he would be down in the city thinker, but to move your court into the existing region of an unauthorized and well-known figure was like it's an infringement on his contract, an infringement on his, his known territory. Like salesmen, as they were, that you can't go and walk into someone else's territory and take it over. And the Shpoda said he was really quite angry at them for simply showing up without, doing the proper petitions and the proper arrangements and things like that. So we had a lot of fights of this nature with the authorized figures. He was known for erratic behavior in a lot of ways. In 1798, he decided to take a trip to Israel, and he decided to take only his closest disciple and to travel in secret, like in disguise, not letting anyone know who he was as a Hasidic leader, the grandson of Baal Shem Tov. And on this trip, he would make fun of the other Hasidim that he met on the boat. He would engage in wild, erratic behavior, dancing, singing, things like this. And in fact, breast lovers today are known for their unusual displays of energy during prayer, clapping, stamping their feet, things like that, which are not typically seen in your regular Orthodox synagogue, where the disturbances are mainly limited to cell phone calls. Yeah, so he ended up having to sort of move to his own space, which he did in 1802. That's when he moved to Breslov. At this point, he had a significant enough following that he could establish a court which would retain there basically until the end of his life. He only moved to Oman in the last couple of years when he was suffering from tuberculosis. And it's at this time that he began to work on his literary creations in earnest. His literature, some of which were written by his own hand, some of which were recorded by his disciples, were very unusual and highly creative and unique books that had no precedent in the Hasidic canon in so many ways. And I'll give you a couple of examples right now. But prior to that, I'll just say that the corpus of the Breslov literature that we have today is deeply impoverished by the fact that Nachman burned many of his books. Quite a few, and then after a while he felt, for whatever reason, he never really divulged it, perhaps that they contained too much mystical information. He ordered them burnt. This was a tremendous inspiration to a 20th century Jewish writer who read of Rabbi Nachman's work with tremendous enthusiasm and interest, none other than Franz Kafka, who I think I'd like to talk about in a few weeks. The famous and very disturbed Czech Jewish writer who wrote, you may recall, the Metamorphosis, the story about a man who wakes up and discovers he's a massive cockroach and what that means. Another story called The Trial, where a man wakes up and learns that he's on trial in a capital offense, and he has no idea what exactly his crime was, or when the trial is going to take place, or who's his defense attorney, and this whole nightmarish situation where he's trying to figure out really the meaning of his life, and there are only hints and clues, and he doesn't see any rhyme or reason. Kafka also ordered his closest friend to destroy all of his brilliant manuscripts, and then he promptly killed himself. For the benefit of world literature, his friend decided the manuscripts were simply too valuable, and he did not burn them, and they ended up becoming published, become classics. But the connection is very clear. Kafka read a lot of Rabbi Nachman, was fascinated with the same kinds of stories that Rabbi Nachman will write, and was deeply influenced by them. Yes. Oh, one last point, two last points I should make on this slide. Excuse me. I forgot to mention that perhaps the most controversial aspect of Rabbi Nachman's activity was his messianic pretensions, which are rarely stated in an outright fashion, but it's clear that he harbored notions of tremendously exalted status of himself within the end of days. It may have been that he regarded himself as an Elijah-like figure, perhaps the harbinger of the Messiah. He certainly felt that one of his infant sons, again, who died in infancy, would be the Messiah, and he placed great hopes on him. And these kinds of things, which are not completely unknown in the Hasidic movement. It's hard to find too many Hasidic movements that have not had a first brushing with the idea that they're ready to be the Messiah. But Rabbi Nachman was unusually vocal about it and attracted a lot of criticism, like a lightning rod, because of his pronouncements. There's only one Rebbe who was a strong advocate of Rabbi Nachman, and he held to his position right to his very end. He died 1 year before Rabbi Nachman, and that was the great Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev. You may have heard of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak. He is known as the defense attorney of the Jewish people, the Sneger Shel Yisrael, because he basically finds the good in everyone throughout his life. In fact, there's a lot to say about Rabbi Levi Yitzchak. There's a famous passage in which he even once called God himself to a din Torah to answer for the treatment of the Jewish people. That's a whole episode. Okay, so quite a bit of writing at this time, but I haven't told you too much about what those writings say. As I mentioned 17 times already, highly original writings. To be sure, he wrote a lot of traditional ma'amarim that are comparable to the regular kind of Hasidic discourse, with references and with standard scholarly apparatus and so on. And those are perhaps less remarkable. What makes him stand out, and which also perhaps gives him much larger audience to draw from, is his stories. His Sipurei Masiot. And there are two really salient differences between his stories and those that are associated with other Hasidic courts. The first one is that they are original literary creations by Rabbi Nachman himself. In other Hasidic courts, you have lots of Hasidic stories, usually highly hagiographical in nature, meaning, amazing stories about what this Rabbi did or what this Rabbi said, things like that. But they're always created and circulated by the disciples. In this case, we have a Rebbe who himself sets to pen to page these stories on his own. They are like novels, as it were. I mean, they're not structured like novels at all. They're stories. They're short, a few pages long, and they're collected, though. He published them all in one volume, and then there are a few scattered throughout. But that's really an unusual thing for a Rebbe to write stories, as opposed to making these, scholarly lectures, and then his followers create the stories about him. That's one unusual factor of Rabbi Nachman. The other on his stories, the other really unusual factor is that the stories hardly ever deal with Jewish topics head on. They read more like fairy tales. Complex parables about kings and princesses and captured princesses and pirates. And you can very easily read them as somewhat twisted children's stories. I mean, they don't have the kind of satisfying endings that you would like to see in a typical bedtime story, but they are highly imaginative and they spur one's thought. I mean, gosh, what are the possible implications? And they're quite enigmatic, very Kafkaesque, to use the term anachronistically. It's really writing like Kafka, because Kafka would later be writing like Rabbi Nachman. I'll give you an example, but first I have to tell you a joke, because this one jumped into my head. And I apologize for those of you who come to my lectures every week. I know you've heard this joke before, but it's therapeutic for me to tell you this joke, so it goes like this. And so there are three college students in a dorm, and they're talking about their spiritual leaders, about how great they are. And one student says, "My guru, he is totally amazing. The powers he has, you can't imagine. Once we were walking in the forest, and there was a raging river, and we saw in the middle of the river, there was a little kitten who was like trapped on a floating branch. And so my guru, he stretched out his hands, and for 6 feet around him, the water stopped flowing. He walked out on the dry riverbed, rescued the kitten, brought him to safety." The other student says, "Oh, that's nothing. My Swami, you wouldn't believe what he's like. Once we were walking past a rushing highway, moving so fast, it was definitely not I-95. It was called, the cars were like just going fast, like 60, 70 miles an hour. And we saw that in the median, separating the lanes, there was a little puppy. And so my Swami, he got up from the lotus position, and he stretched out his hands, and then for 6 feet around him, the car simply stopped moving. And he calmly walked out to the median, he picked up the puppy and brought him to safety." And the Jewish kid says, "That's nothing. My rabbi, once we were walking on the street on Shabbos, and we saw a $20 bill, he stretched out his hands, and for 6 feet around us, it was Tuesday." That's like slightly anti-Semitic. I probably shouldn't tell that, but that's like transvaluing, like it was Tuesday, right? Okay.
Sitting upright together on the bed.
I'm sorry to be about that you had to hear that, but anyways, so let me give you an example. Perhaps the most famous of the Sipuri Masio is the story of the sometimes translated Mr. Prince, sometimes translated Turkey Prince. And by the way, also very unusual, he had them published simultaneously in a bilingual edition. The original version of Sipuri Maiso was published with Yiddish on top, which was the vernacular, what the common person could read, men and women, uneducated, whatever. And then at the bottom, there was a rabbinic Hebrew translation of the Yiddish Torah, which at once made this a plebeian document that was accessible to everyone, even to a mother reading these stories to her children at night. And at the same time, it was a Hasidic learned discourse in the high language of literary Hebrew. I shouldn't say the high language of literary Hebrew because, the Hebrew was not completely accurate. That was grammatically, that's one of the main criticisms of the form of the Sipuri Maiso that Joseph Pearl would bring up. He would say, look how foolish these Hasidim are. Look how badly they write in Hebrew. But nevertheless, Rabbi Nachman insisting that his teachings be delivered in both the vernacular ensured their wide circulation, and by writing them in Hebrew, which unfortunately was prescient because the vast majority of Yiddish speakers would be killed in the Holocaust, it meant that his books had an enduring presence that would make them popular with the resurgence in Israel after the Six-Day War, which we'll talk about towards the end of this lecture. So the text actually exists in a dual language edition right from the very beginning. This is one of my favorite stories in the Sipuri Maiso. There was once a king whose son goes mad. Madness figures in quite a few of the stories, by the way. People who lose their sensibility. And the prince insisted that he was in fact a turkey. He took off all of his clothes. He refused to sit at the table and eat like a prince. He insisted the only thing he would eat is like crumbs and kernels of corn and things like that were scattered under the table. And so the king was totally out of his wits' end. What could he do with his mentally unbalanced son? He went to all of the doctors, all of the sages. The rabbis themselves can't deal with this particular problem. Until finally, from far off, a sage came and said that he had the solution. and that the king, if the king would give him permission, he would cure his son, but he had to tolerate whatever strange measures he would use to cure. The king, of course, with no alternative, says, please, cure my son. So right away, the sage takes off all of his clothes and gets under the table with the prince. The prince says to the sage, what are you doing? And the sage says, what do you mean, what am I doing? I'm sitting under the table, eating some kernels of corn off the floor, just like you. He says, well, why are you doing this? He says, well, because I'm a turkey, just like you. And the prince says, oh, okay. So they're naked under the table, eating kernels of corn off the floor. And this goes on for a while. And then the sage signals to his attendant, and the attendant throws him in a pair of pants. And the sage puts on his pants. And the prince says to him, what are you doing? Turkeys don't wear pants. And the prince says, the sage says, what do you mean turkeys don't wear pants? Look at me, I'm wearing pants. Turkeys can wear pants, no problem. So the prince thinks about it for a little while. He signals and gets a pair of pants. The sage then gets a shirt, and gets a jacket, and sits on a chair at the table. And incrementally, every time they have this dialogue, the prince is saying, what are you doing? What kind of turkey are you? You think a turkey can't eat at the table? I can eat at the table. And so this goes on until ultimately the prince is cured. And that, enigmatically and characteristically, is the end of the story. And you wonder, like, what's that all about? What is the meaning of that? Much ink has been spilled on these kinds of, bizarre and seemingly non-sequitur stories. One of the interpretations that I happen to find appealing is the notion that, and again, I'm not a personal expert by any means, but this happens to be an approach that I think makes sense in this bigger story, is that we live ultimately in a world in which we are uncertain as to our own identity. We're not totally convinced that we are human beings. We may be turkeys. We're not totally convinced that we are angelic in our capabilities. We could be animals, like the fowl of the sky and the fish of the sea. We could be just, walking bits of meat. And the only way that we can be cured of this is by, there's the image. The only way that we can be cured of this is by imitating a human being, imitating a higher level creature. So the analogy here, the nimshal to the mashal, is that we may not think of ourselves as highly accomplished spiritual beings, but that is within our nature. If only we, as one of my friends used to say, fake it till we make it. We just keep going on, thinking of ourselves as princes, trying to act as princes. We deep down think we're turkeys, but we're still going to try and imitate the prince. And hopefully one day we will be cured. Now that's, I've given you kind of like an overarching structure to understand the story, but Rabbi Nachman doesn't. Rabbi Nachman just leaves you with the story, and then you turn the page, there's a new story all of a sudden. And a lot of them are like this. The princess who's captured, the whole country that is driven insane by a scourge on the wheat, and the sage decides to eat it himself so that he will still fit in with the insanity of the country. All these kinds of stories really are a spur to the mind, to the imagination, and they carry great literary impact upon the Jewish tradition. Okay, another example of his very powerful impact is he either authored or popularized a lot of epigrammatic statements, meaning like one sentence, very pithy encapsulations of Jewish philosophy that continue to have their impact on the Jewish mind today. I'm sure you've heard, I have the picture here, Kol ha'olam kulo yesher k'tzar me'od. The entire world is but a narrow bridge. Ve'ikar lo lefached klal. And the essential point is, don't be afraid. Right? That's a line of Rabbi Nachman, just this idea that we're traversing this narrow, scary chasm on a tiny little unbalanced bridge, and you've got to get to the other side. And the main thing is, no fear. just keep moving forward. And this is a beautiful, beautiful thing that, again, he wrote it in literary Hebrew, which meant that it survived the linguistic challenge of the 20th century. And in Israel, of course, it became a folk song. You know, I would sing it for you, but I think you would regret that. Many of his statements, in fact, became folk songs. Mitzvah gedola liot b'simcha tamid. It is a great commandment to be happy always. I'm not sure there is a commandment to be happy. There is a commandment to be happy on Yom Tov specifically. V'samachta v'chagecha, right? Be happy on holiday. By the way, the Vilna Gaon, he was once asked, this is a typical characteristic difference between Hasidim and Misnagdim. He was once asked, what's the most difficult mitzvah for you to perform? And he said, definitely v'samachta v'chagecha, to be happy for 8 days in a row. That's tough, right? So, anyways, Rabbi Nachman, though, mitzvah gedola liot b'simcha tamid, it is a great mitzvah to be happy always. I think I told you 2 weeks ago about that incident at the Kiev experienced. Maybe not. It would be great if you totally forgot, because then I can tell it again. And it goes like, it's we were sitting having a Friday night meal, and a yeshiva boker bursts into the room. He's kind of disheveled. And they say, what's wrong with you? And he says, I was accosted on the way here. They wanted to take my money. And I said, I'm an observant Jew. I don't have any money. So they let me go. And so then all the guys in the yeshiva start singing in Russian, Очень счастливый я, потому что я еврей. I am very fortunate to be a Jew, which went straight into, in Hebrew, mitzvah gedola liot b'simcha tamid. And those 2 lines in Russian, I am so fortunate to be a Jew. It is a great mitzvah to be happy always. We sang that for maybe 40 minutes. It was a really intense spiritual experience. I was terrified, but I can't forget that moment. Okay, so he wrote a lot of these epigrams. You may have heard the saying, when I saw it associated with Rabbi Nachman, I actually couldn't believe it. I said, no way, this comes from somewhere else. And it may be true, perhaps we have some very erudite members in the room, some of whom have taken a vow of silence because they don't want to ask any too hard questions. But apparently it was Rabbi Nachman who said, God never gives us a challenge that we cannot overcome. You know, that's like, is that really Rabbi Nachman? That sticks in your brain? These are the kinds of things that he contributed. He also created a wide variety of spiritual practices or exercises called tikkunim, which is a Kabbalistic term meaning repairs. If you damage the world or yourself through a particular sin of one type or another, then these are the repairs. This is how you effect a positive change to what you've done wrong. The Tikkun Klali, he has a list of what kinds of things you should do for what kinds of sins. Typically, they involve the recitation of certain psalms and things like that. The most famous of the Tikkunim, however, was towards the end of his life. He promised his followers that if they would come and say a particular Tikkun on his grave at Rosh Hashanah, then no matter what they have done in their life, Rabbi Nachman will take them by their peyot, by their forelocks, and so these tikkunim have had tremendous, popularity, and they continue to inspire tens of thousands of people, even today, who go to Uman to be at the grave of Rabbi Nachman. And many of whom are not at all Breslov Hasidim, but are moved by that concept of tikkun. So let's move on to this Uman itself. As I mentioned, his main activity was in Breslov, but there was a fire at one point that destroyed his home, and he was left temporarily homeless. He could have simply relocated to another building in that city, but for several years he had very positive relationship with several notorious maskilim in Uman. So what is going on here? First of all, what is Uman? It's an old city. Jews have been living there for several hundred years, and it is most noted in the Jewish chronology as the site of a terrible massacre in 1768. This was the Honta or Gonta massacre, also known as the Heidemark massacre, when peasants revolted and slaughtered Jews as they had done 100 years before in the Khmelnytsky massacre. It's a whole social, political, economic mess, but the bottom line is that quite a large period of time in that year, and there was a cemetery that was expanded to contain all of the graves. Rabbi Nachman remarked towards the end of his life that this would be a good place to die and be buried, and he was, of course, predicting his own end, because at that point he had contracted tuberculosis, an illness that was still quite widespread. If I'm not mistaken, it claimed his wife the year before, and he lasted 3 years with this illness before he finally succumbed. He moved to Oman, and there he significantly developed his relationship with Maskilim. Maskilim, you will recall from last week's lecture on Joseph Pearl, these are adherents of the Haskalah, the Jewish Enlightenment, who Western Europe tended to jettison their Jewish practices, kashrut, the Shabbat, and so on. In Eastern Europe, less so, but they definitely were antinomian, changed their dress usually for upper-class Polish dress at this time. Studied the sciences, studied Polish language, things like that, and were generally considered, in the context of that time, assimilated Jews. They were certainly not assimilated by Western European standards, which reminds me of one more joke. I can't help it, but we're almost done. The joke, did I tell you the joke about the guy who wants to become a member of the Flaming Crosses Country Club? So there's this restricted country club. I'm so glad none of you remember my jokes. He wants to be a member, a Jewish guy wants to become a member of a restricted country club, where they don't admit Jews, Gentile clientele only. And so he goes to the management offices. I've been very successful in business. I have several yachts that are right now lined up at the boat show and all kinds of annuities and what have you, and I'd really like to be a member. I can certainly pay the dues. In fact, I can sponsor a few other members if you like. And the manager says, I'm very sorry, Mr. Goldstein, but we have a restricted clientele. And we don't accept new members unless, for example, you have a sponsorship from an existing member. So he says, oh, that's great. I'll just find a Jew who's already a member. I'll go to him. He'll sponsor me, and I'm in. So he says, can I see your membership list? He says, of course. He shows him the list. Looks down. He sees the name Goldfarb. Oh, that's it. So he goes to Goldfarb's home, knocks on the door. Goldfarb opens the door. Goldstein says, Shalom Aleichem, Rabbi. My name's Goldstein, and I was really hoping to become a member of the Flaming Crosses Country Club. Would you please sponsor me? Goldfarb looks him in the eye and says to him, listen to me very carefully, Mr. Goldfarb, is it? I forget Goldstein. Listen to me very carefully, Mr. Goldstein. I am a Presbyterian, and my father is a Presbyterian. And my grandfather, Oliver Shalom, was also a Presbyterian. So these are the kind of masculine that might exist. I know there's a lot of discussion because this is, you have to realize, within a context for Rabbi Nachman to be associating with heretical Jews was highly controversial. It was like, again, in the thermidor of Hasidic thought at that time, to be messing around with ordinary people. Maybe it's a little bit like the sage who gets under the table naked. That's highly unusual. Some say that perhaps he was trying to be makar of them to bring them closer to Judaism and so on. It's not clear. We know that they played a lot of chess together, things like that. He ultimately passed away at the age of 38 of tuberculosis and was buried in that city. But the story, of course, does not end with his death. His legacy is really very much alive. As I mentioned at the beginning of this lecture, since he had such strong messianic statements, and he had made such a central figure of himself, and never preparing anything like a successor, with perhaps the exception of his child who died before he was 2 years old, there would be no question that nobody could take Rabbi Nachman's place. And so, unlike all the other Hasidic groups, they simply continued without a Rebbe at the helm. Perhaps with some thoughts that the Rabbi Nachman would later play a role in the unfoldment of the era, it's not clear. Multiple centers of Breslov Hasidus developed, especially after the Second World War, and it's basically two types. There are a few schools that are led by charismatic students of Breslov, mainly around Mea Shearim, highly traditional neighborhood in Jerusalem. And also there are centers in New York City, for example. But the core constituency remains kind of like old Hasidim that will trace their lineage back for decades, even centuries. But the large numbers of followers are really Balei Tshuva, are people who come to Judaism later in life. In fact, many Sephardim are attracted to Breslover Hasidut. They have no connection ethnically with these teachings. Why is this so? Well, we've already discussed some of the tremendously infectious aspects of Rabbi Nachman's thought and teachings. There's also this resurgence of interest in Judaism as a whole after 1967. If you recall those days, it's hard for me to. I was just a child at that time, but as I'm sure all of you were just children at that time too. But what my elders tell me is that people were just getting used to the idea that we made it through the Holocaust, we survived the Holocaust, we're being pulled together, we even have a state of our own, and then look, we're about to lose that state, we're going to be pushed into the sea. And then, almost beyond imagination, the Jews managed, the Israelis managed to turn the tide, not only defend the nation, but to expand the borders beyond belief, completely beyond belief. There's a Russian joke that was popular when I was there that said, Russia was thinking of attacking China, the rivalry between the two communist nations. And someone in the military academy asked one of the generals, Tovarich, how can we possibly defeat China? China has a massive army, millions of soldiers, larger than our army. And the general says, that's no problem. Look at, you can always win with a smaller army. The Jews with 6 million soldiers or 6 million Jews were able to take over armies with 40 million Arabs. So we can do it too. And the Russian soldier says, yeah, but where are we going to get 6 million Jews? Somewhat had them. Anyways, some of the Breslov movements, the relations between the movements are sometimes acrimonious. I forgot my train of thought, but we'll go to this here. There's one particular leader who passed away about 20 years ago, who was called Baal HaPetek, the master of the note, like the document, because he claimed to have received a note, some kind of mystical note that was Rabbi Nachman communicating with him, saying how to bring about the Messiah, and it involved the chanting of a particular clause, Nachma Me'uman. It's hard to translate this. The na really isn't a word in Hebrew. It might be read as please. Nach means rest. Nachma is related to the word for console. Nachman is his name. And Me'uman means from the city of Uman. Meaning you say, please rest, console, Nachman of Uman. And so this is a slogan that's worn by this particular group, a very large group. You may see it's very popular to wear large, white knitted yarmulkes with this phrase, handwritten around or crocheted around the side. But there are many of these groups. And as I mentioned earlier, the tikkun associated with Rabbi Nachman in Rosh Hashanah is incredibly popular. You can get, you can book a tour to Uman for Rosh Hashanah, very popular. I have many friends who have done it. And you can participate in this movement, which is 200 years old and still quite vibrant and growing. So with that, I want to thank you so much for your attention and your endurance over the last hour, and I hope you have an excellent week.
I know why. I would have liked to know him too. He only helped me once. He was so proud. He thought you were the most beautiful girl in the world. Her voice is a deathly hush. Welcome to the But then, she will be in tears next. I know, Mom.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, why don't we get started? So as I think I mentioned last week, I've been reading, hi Fred, how are you? As I mentioned last week, I've been reading Ruth Weiss's new book on Jewish humor, and it's exceptionally good, but not quite as funny as I thought. I thought there'd be more jokes in it, but there's like really deep analysis. And in fact, tonight's topic comes from her work, as I'll explain. We'll get a little further into the story. So I had to go to an unknown, untested source for humor and I found something a few minutes ago on my phone, looking on the internet under a website called Jewish Humor. The joke goes like this. I'm not exactly sure it's funny. That's never stopped me, I guess. So the joke goes like this. There's a booby walking with her yingala on the boardwalk. Grandmother and her grandson are walking on the boardwalk. They're holding hands. It's really very nice. Miami Beach, early February. And as they're walking along, there's kind of a rumbling, and they look up, and a massive tsunami comes. And the water just crashes onto the shore and drenches the two of them. And when the grandmother gets up, she sees Rahman al-Islam lo aleinu, the little yingala has been washed out to sea.
I don't know yet.
So she says, haven't I been a good grandmother? Haven't I sacrificed for my children? Haven't I dedicated so many hours to Hadassah, and haven't I given to the UJA? And I've done everything. Bring me back my yingala. So there's a rumbling again, and once again another massive tsunami comes, dumps all the water on the grandmother, and when she looks up, there he is. She grabs him by the shoulders and she embraces him and she makes sure he's okay, and she looks up to God and she says, he had a hat. So it's I think that's a joke that in many ways is indicative of a certain genre of Jewish humor. I'd like to spend some time thinking about it on an academic level and giving a lecture on the topic, but there's a certain a quality of a relationship with God that is associated with the long-suffering Jewish people that makes that joke especially funny. The first part of it's kind of dark, and I don't like to think about it, but at any rate, there's a joke. Tonight's topic is, as I mentioned, taken from Ruth Weiss's book. This is a figure that I've come across in some of the research I used to do in 19th century Eastern European studies, but I never spent much attention looking at him until she used him as an exemplar of early 19th century Jewish humor. And she said a fascinating thing. She basically argues that there are three distinct strands of Jewish humor in Eastern Europe that corresponded to the major fissures in intellectual and religious life of the Jews of that time and place. And I thought that was a fascinating thesis, and I'd like to definitely explore it a little more with you tonight, and perhaps on another lecture we'll go into in great detail. But let's understand, who is this man, Joseph Pearl? You may have heard of him perhaps if you took classes in Hebrew literature, because he is often regarded as the first modern Hebrew novelist. He wrote a fairly important book that was a satire. It was an epistolary novel in the early 19th century, and so his styling in Hebrew in many ways set the tone for later Hebrew language satirists and also for essayists. Very important in the history of Hebrew literature. He also made contributions to Yiddish literature because he actually ended up translating his Hebrew novels, which could not be read so easily by most people, into the Yiddish vernacular, and in so doing, providing a very unusual kind of people speaking in vernacular Yiddish, translating into Hebrew, and then translating back once again into Yiddish. A very interesting sort of pathway for expression using these major Jewish languages. And so at that, understanding these things, he plays an interesting and important role in the history of Hebrew and Yiddish literature. That in itself would normally not be enough for me to want to spend the time reading more about him. What I found fascinating and somewhat sad about Joseph Pearl's life is that he was an incredibly ferocious critic of the early Hasidic movement, publishing often anonymously under pseudonym critiques of the Hasidic movement, and penning letter after letter to Austrian government officials and Russian government officials denouncing the Hasidic movement and trying to have its leaders controlled and even imprisoned. And in this sense, he was a tremendous enemy of a burgeoning movement of the 19th century, expressing a deep dissatisfaction with the intellectual confines of his homeland in eastern Galicia, and he provides a very useful jumping off point for us to discuss those seams of why Jews became Hasidim, why they would remain Misnatim, and I'll explain these terms more, why they would turn to the Haskalah, as with Joseph Pearl. It's Interesting to note that
I stare
he
at my
died
receipt for
apparently
page
on the holiday of Simchas Torah, quite just before Simchas Torah, which is a holiday, as I'm sure you're aware, of great festivity and rejoicing. And the legend has it that Hasidim went to his grave and literally danced on his grave on Simchas Torah. Whether that legend is true or not, I have not actually been able to pin down, but nevertheless it gives you a sense of the bitter fight between people who fell into Joseph Pearl's camp and the early Hasidic movement, that they would resort to such a demonstration of displeasure long after his demise. So that's basically who we're going to talk about. What I'd like to do with today's lecture is first concentrate on the political context, because it was a very exciting and formative time for modern Jewry. And then I'd like to look at the religious context and try to understand what exactly were they all arguing about. And then we're going to look at Joseph Pearl's activities specifically, and that's going to wrap us up for tonight. Okay, any questions, objections before we begin? Yes? Yeah, he was born basically when the Hasidic movement just began to find its legs. If you're looking at the broader scope of the Hasidic movement, you have in the late 17th and early 16th century, you have kind of itinerant proto-Hasidic figures who are called in the plural Baalei Shem, which is maybe we'll get back to that a little later. We'll get to the Baal Shem Tov, which is one particular leader. And they're espousing a very kind of Kabbalistic, perhaps even Sabbatian approach to Judaism, following Shabbatai Tzvi teachings. You recall he was the false Messiah of the 17th century. And then there's one figure, the Baal Shem Tov, who is regarded as the father of the Hasidic movement, and his dates are roughly 1698 to 1760. He died, and there was a certain amount of time before a successor was found. It turned out to be the Maggid of Mezrich, who died in 1772, leaving five main disciples, and of course Joseph Pearl was born 1 year after that. Those five disciples, which included, among others, the Alter Rebbe, who was the founder of the Chabad movement, very powerful and influential today, really solidified the Hasidic movement throughout Eastern Europe. So in other words, he's born 1 year after you really get the strong movement of the Hasidic world. By the time you get to his period of activity around the turn of the 19th century, that's when the Hasidic movement is beginning to really reach its stride, and the conflict is at its most heated. Yes, Ms. Abramson.
Sorry. My hair. And I like yours. Snuggling against his chest.
Brilliant question. I'll repeat the question. The question was, did Joseph Pearl reject Hasidism because of his own ideas or because of those of his teachers? So that's much too hard a question to put to your father in this kind of public environment. I frankly don't know enough about his early teachings. What I can, and his early influences, what I can tell you is that he himself was a devotee of the Hasidic movement. He himself was a young Chassid, and then he fell away under the influence, in particular, of Moses Mendelssohn, who was the most important Maskilic figure of the time. So let's pause and we'll come back to that. Okay.
I smile shyly.
Weiter, Halavai Weiter.
Feeling a little self-conscious.
Okay, so let's look at the political context first. Okay, we're talking about he was born in 1773. This is an incredibly important period because it represents a dramatic upheaval, really a borderline historically between the medieval and the modern periods for Eastern Europe. Primarily because of the activity of this woman, Catherine II, known as Catherine the Great. Rather fascinating biography of her in particular. The Romanov dynasty, the Russian emperors, the Tsars, had difficulty producing heirs that were physically and mentally competent to rule this massive empire. And so went to Prussia, northern Germany, to find some small nobleman's daughter that she could bring over essentially to improve the gene pool. And she married him to her rather incompetent husband. This young 18-year-old girl who didn't know anything about the world and had never left her region in Prussia and so on. She was suddenly, the Tsarina of Russia. What she did was she promptly had an affair with the captain of the guards, one of possibly 70 known affairs that she had in her lifetime. Pretty amazing. And she had her husband, the emperor, killed, and she named herself the Empress Tsarina Catherine of the Great. She turned out to be the most bloodthirsty warrior the Russian Empire ever produced, and she was an incredibly competent administrator, expanding the territory of the Russian Empire by about a third, and primarily wealthy areas in Europe and in the northern part of the Black Sea. You get a certain amount of a sense of her personality from her regular robes, but this was a rather scandalous picture that she preferred. She often went about in much more male clothing, riding horses and so on. So what did she do, and what does it have to do with the Jews? She engineered the partition of Poland, beginning in the year 1772 and extending through, I think it was 1795, right? Poland was an incredibly wealthy state with huge latifundia, meaning these huge farms, particularly in the southern region, in Ukraine, some very major and important European towns like Warsaw, but they had a form of government that was at once very beautiful. It had a tremendous level of democracy that was, incomparable when you looked at other countries in the region, and at the same time hugely unworkable because it spent way too much time paying attention to the opinions of petty noblemen, which other countries were already doing away with them, much more efficient forms of government. So basically what happened was Catherine the Great made a deal with the two other neighboring states of Poland, and they simply divided up the country between the three of them. Germany took the northern sections of Poland in 3 successive stages. Austria, which would become the dual monarchy of Austria and Hungary, took 3 sections here, and Russia took these 3 sections over here. And Poland simply disappeared from the map in 1795 because it was not powerful enough to defend itself from its neighbors. What does this have to do with the Jews? Poland was the home of the largest concentration of Jews in the world at the time. They were largely here because over the 13th through the 18th centuries, they were migrating from Eastern Europe. The German Jews, the word for German in rabbinic Hebrew is Ashkenaz. So the Ashkenazi Jews were making their way into Poland for various economic reasons and also being driven eastward because of anti-Semitism in Germany and France. And so they're all piling up, and they have all kinds of activities, particularly in southern Poland here, but also in the cities as well, extending way up into Lithuania, which is where Jews with, Lithuania is known for Jews with the highest levels of intelligence and superior fashion sense, and a lot of things like that. Jews from Lithuania, right? Okay. There we go. By the way, my family's from Lithuania. What a coincidence. Right. So anyway, now Russia was kind of like the wall that Jews